Hello students, and welcome to the next lesson in our AS level physical geography course. Today we're going to be looking at the exploitation of the tundra. Reasons to exploit the tundra. Now there are many reasons in order to exploit periglacial areas. They offer a lot of resources to use and also a lot of potential to test things out on. You can do a lot of fishing and whaling there. You can mine for oil and coal. There is a lot of tourism which may go on, for example in Greenland and Antarctica. You can use it for hydroelectric power, scientific research, and also military testing, as well as nuclear disposal because there isn't really much up there. So as a result, the tundra areas are going to be exploited in order to use all of these things. Now, the TransAlaskan Pipeline was an example of the exploitation of the tundra's resources. As you can see, the massive pipeline was built from the south of Alaska all the way up to the north. And it was called the TransAlaskan Pipeline because it travels across Alaska. So it was built from firstly Prudhoe Bay, which is in the north end of Alaska, and it moved all the way down to Valdez. So in the north end of Alaska we could have Prudhoe Bay, and the oil was then cultivated in Valdez. It impacted the area in many ways. The first of which is that it harmed habitats when it was being constructed. Also, the pipeline prevented biodiversity migration patterns because it wasn't built under the ice, it was actually built over it, so it did damage the way that biodiversity migrated across the land. Also, leaks would potentially harm biodiversity if they came to be. It also caused pollution when it was being built, which could enhance the greenhouse effect and make climate change even worse. So how was the pipeline managed in order to make it sustainable? We know that there were tons of impacts, but how was it managed? Well, firstly, it was elevated when it was built, so as a result it wouldn't radiate as much heat onto the ice which would melt it, hence destroying the habitats. Also, it was zigzagged. This means that if there was an earthquake, it wouldn't spill the oil which would harm the ecosystem. It was also insulated, so again it wouldn't radiate as much heat onto the ground, and as a result it wouldn't destroy habitats. Also, it goes under roads, so this wouldn't disrupt people's commutes or people's lives when they were travelling. The indigenous people of the tundra. The Sami were a people that were really affected by the exploitation of the tundra. They lived in Europe and they were a tribe which lived there. They survived by hunting and fishing, and they kept their lifestyle sustainable by relocating their living space by moving with the reindeer, so they didn't deplete stock levels in a single area. The Inuit were also people that were harmed by the exploitation of tundras. However, they lived in the periglacial areas in Northern America. They hunted seals, narwhal and fish in order to stay alive, and they kept it sustainable by relocating their fishing spots every few months so the fish levels weren't depleted in a single time. Now we'll look at the environmental impacts of exploitation on the tundra. Overfishing kills a lot of the biodiversity, so this is a big problem by people who go to the tundra in order to fish. Trawling, which is a fishing technique, also kills much of the biodiversity on the ground. How it works is that a massive net is put on the seabed and literally it scrapes at the seabed to pick up all the animals it can. As a result, this really damages the seabed and prevents more coral or sea life to be growing there again in the future. Also, travel from cruise ships emits pollution which can damage the area, and it can also affect the greenhouse effect. Tourism also harms biodiversity when people head there, and mining can contaminate waters, which as a result can also harm biodiversity. Now, most of the environmental impacts to do with the exploitation of resources due to the TransAlaskan Pipeline and also exploitation in general is mainly focused around biodiversity. Social impacts of the exploitation of the tundra. Many indigenous people died as imported diseases were brought to their areas. As the tundra began to be exploited, the travellers who went there brought smallpox and the flu, which did kill off a lot of the people of the indigenous tribes because they didn't have the medicine to be able to combat it. Famine also led to the depletion of fish. So what happened was, because all of this overfishing occurred, famine happened to the indigenous people who lived there because they didn't have as much fish to eat. Also, less resources were available for the locals as they were being used up by the people who moved there. Mining contaminates the locals' drinking water, so they were unable to be able to drink, and if they did, they would probably get ill. Industry also drives away biodiversity, which disrupted the hunting period for the Sami and the Inuit, and as a result they didn't have the right food in order to be able to survive with. So how do we manage the exploitation of the tundra? As we can see, there are a lot of social and environmental impacts on the tundra, and now we need to know how to manage it. Firstly, we could implement fishing quotas. This would solve the problem of overfishing and the depletion of resources for the indigenous people, because we're going to be limiting the amount of fish people can actually fish. We can also put limits in tourism, which is going to prevent the destruction of biodiversity when people go to the areas to go on a tour. We can also put pollution limits on ships, so not as much oil and plastic can be discarded overboard. We can also build constructions on aggregate pads. These are pads which are going to insulate the building and hence emit less heat. We can also build smaller buildings, so less heat is emitted, and as a result, using smaller buildings and aggregate pads, and also utilidors, which are basically ways to transport water and heat over ground so ice doesn't melt, we're not going to get any melting of the ice, which will destroy habitats. Also, we can elevate pipelines to do this, so for example, in the case of the TransAlaskan Pipeline, the ice wouldn't melt. Here are some questions on the exploitation of the tundra. Have a go at answering these on another sheet of paper by pausing the video to give yourself time. Hit play whenever you're ready to see the answers. Here are the answers. If you got these right, congratulations. I'd advise you to move on to the next video, which will be on issues in Antarctica. As always, thanks for watching and good luck in your exam.